Good morning, I'm Chris Fox. Welcome to my series on outlining your novel. We're going to go through outlining one of my novels, and I'm going to show you every part of my process so you understand kind of how I approach this. I'd encourage you to steal liberally, but also to question. When you see me doing something, don't just accept it on blind faith and do it yourself. Figure out what parts of what I'm doing work for you and what you can modify to craft a better system that's unique to you. So there's a lot of densely packed information, and I encourage you to watch the video more than once if needed. I've broken it down into multiple parts because each one of these parts is kind of its own skill. So the first skill that we're going to tackle is creating the premise for your novel, which we're going to launch into next. If you were anything like me, the concept of outlining was strange and bewildering when you learned about it back in your 9th grade English class. I still remember staring down at a piece of paper with a Roman numeral I and no idea what to do with that. 20 years later, I have the benefit of hindsight, and I realized that the piece that the teachers weren't telling us was that before you can do an effective outline, you need a premise. A basic premise is the cornerstone of your novel, and that's what we're going to work on here today. I'm going to teach you a simple technique, something I call the sales technique, to generate a premise so that you have a starting point that we can use to generate an outline. So we'll begin with the first step of that process. The S in sales stands for setting. Your setting encompasses everything that makes your book a part of whatever genre it's in. So for example, my series is science fiction. And to come up with a setting, things like faster than light travel and giant starships and big lasers, I needed to figure out what intellectual property mine was most similar to. And understand that this is just a reference point. I'm not going to clone what I pick. I'm just going to use that as a starting point to define what I'm writing. In my case, I picked Mass Effect, which kind of informed me on how the plot was going to go and what my setting looked like. Things like my Helios gates were created from the Mass Effect relays in Mass Effect. So just picking an IP that is somewhat similar to what you want to write is going to enable you to build that setting. You should figure out what you're going to write, what it is most like, and whenever you have a question about how your setting works, the default should be it works like it does in X, whatever I picked, Harry Potter, Dresden Files, and you can refine that later and make it your own, but for now you just want a starting point. Once you have that setting, you move on to what I think is the most important part of the process, the antagonist, the villain, the person, people, or force that is going to oppose the lead character in your novel. In my case, that's the Void Wraith. They are an ancient race, and for whatever reason, they want to annihilate all sentient life in the galaxy. They've been gone for 26,000 years, and they are now returning. And at this point in the process, that's all I needed to know about the Void Wraith. Your antagonist will get fleshed out in depth throughout the process of outlining, but in the beginning, you just need a couple of sentences about this is who the person or thing is that's going to serve as the antagonist. Then you move on to your lead. Your lead is the protagonist, the person that is going to ultimately impose that antagonist and has the most to lose through the course of this novel. In my case, because I'm writing a Mass Effect style military science fiction space opera, I need a ship and a captain. So I created the UFC Johnston, a destroyer-class vessel, and my hero, the lead, is Commander Nolan. So he's not actually in charge of this ship, but he's the first officer of this ship. Now I've got a setting, I've got an antagonist, and I've got a lead. The cornerstones are built. The last two things that I need are an ending, where the antagonist and the protagonist are going to meet, and then a start point. So I start with the ending and I work backwards. So here's my end point where we're going to have the antagonist and lead meet, and then you're going to draw it down to whatever your start point is. So my ending, I decided, for the novel Destroyer, is that the Void Wraith are working on a fleet. They want to use this fleet to invade our galaxy, and Commander Nolan and the Johnston are the only people that can stop that. And they're going to end up in a titanic space battle with the Void Wraith to prevent the Void Wraith from this massive assault. It's loose, as you can see. It's not very well defined, but I have a general idea of my ending. So now I kind of rewind back some, and I look for a start point. I know what my antagonist wants, I know what my protagonist wants, and I know what the rough ending is. where do they start? And so in the case of my lead, I decided that he has just been exiled to the UFC Johnston, and the Johnston is a part of the 14th Fleet, which is kind of the dregs of humanity's naval fleets. And the antagonist is still in the process of building their fleet. So that's where both factions are at the beginning of the book. And now I'm going to build my way forward back up to that ending. And I know that everything that I write is going to have to touch on both that beginning point and end point. And when I have questions about what that's going to be, I use my setting, my antagonist, and my lead to flesh that out. So I'm going to use those pieces, the sales system we've just gone through, to concoct my initial premise. And we're going to jump into a screencast that I'm going to show you what I wrote. It's going to be several paragraphs about the prequel Exiled that I'm working on next. Okay, as you can see, I've used the sales system to come up with some basics here. And then I use this information to write my first synopsis. So this is the premise of the book, and it's only a rough premise. This is going to change dramatically. We're going to refine the heck out of this, but this is my start point. And then you can see down here, I'm starting to define a cast. So every time I think of somebody who could be a character in the story, I jot them down here. They can be added or deleted as needed, but I'm sort of getting a list of the people that I'll need. And that's how you craft your basic premise. Now that you've done this, it's time to harness your inner 5-year-old. So your inner 5-year-old is going to help you by asking why about everything in this premise. Why are the Void Wraiths doing what they're doing? Why is the agent doing what he's doing? Why is Nolan doing what he's doing? Why would the Admiral recruit Nolan? I'm going to ask dozens of questions, and the answers to those questions are going to help me write a much, much better premise. So the last part of this video, you're going to see the questions that I asked, the answers that I got from them, and the resulting second draft of this premise. So I've added a questions file, and this is not something that'll be done in one pass. It's not a one and done kind of thing. You're going to keep adding more questions as you continue refining the premise of your novel. And you can see I've asked some pretty big questions here. What stage is the relationship between Catherine and Nolan when the book begins? That's going to kind of inform whether or not there's a love story and how does that play out. I'm asking about various people's goals, and in a lot of cases, asking one question will lead to others. So what is the VR agent's specific goal? What is he trying to achieve? And then that led to how Nolan could foil whatever that goal is. I then need to know who is the agent, what are their capabilities, how long before Destroyer does this take place, so how much time is it going to cover? You just keep asking yourself more and more questions and typing out those answers, and this is going to get a little longer. And then when you're done, you rewrite your premise based on the information here. So the last part of this video is going to cover how I've rewritten the premise. You can see the first version and the new version as a result of answering this set of questions. So you can see the difference between the two synopsises. The first one is much shorter, it has a lot less detail. It's going to be much harder to mine for an actual outline. Version 2 has a lot more detail, it's much more comprehensive, it's over twice as long, and I wrote it based on the answers to all the questions in that last section. So as I add more of these, I will probably do at least a third version of the synopsis. Once that third version of the synopsis is done, then it's time to move into the next segment of outlining, which I'll tackle in the second video. The goal of this video is to get the process rolling. So as I said, it is not a one and done kind of thing. When you are working on these synopsises, you have to give your subconscious time to do the heavy lifting. So you want to make sure that you create a synopsis, you start writing down your questions, you think about it for a day or two, you keep fleshing out little bits of it. Don't assume that you're going to sit down for an hour and do this outline. You're going to sit down for 15 minutes, and then tomorrow maybe you'll sit down for another 10, and the day after that maybe it'll be 20. But just do a little bit each day and keep refining this. The idea is for iterative changes. So that's going to take us to the conclusion of this video. I've given you the basics in how to lay out your synopsis, how to turn on your inner 5-year-old so they can sit there and ask why, and then how to mine that so that you can further modify and flesh out your synopsis. So the next video is going to tackle how to come up with plot arcs from the synopsis. And the one after that, we'll get into the actual outlining itself. So hopefully this is helpful. If you have questions on this process, please let me know.